Greetings, Forsaken! FiOth here, and today, a very special occasion. I'm accompanied by Mista, the lead designer for Bleak Faith Forsaken. A game that you probably know is soon coming out on consoles. Spent the last year and a half, I believe, getting streamlined on PC. A very unique experience. Some call it a Souls-like. I think it's more of a traditional action RPG. So today we're going to take some time to talk about the game. I have some interesting notes here to ask the man, and he can lead us down the rabbit hole to explain how the whole project came about and how much work, effort, blood, sweat and tears it entailed getting it to the point it is today. Mista, what's up, my man?
How's it going? First of all, thank you for having me. Wonderful to actually get the ball rolling. I know we've spoken over time, and it's very nice to actually just be here and have the time to sit down and chit-chat a little bit, talk about how everything is. Now that it's been such a long time, there's even more to talk about, so glad to be here.
Some time to chill and take a breath after a year and a half of probably development hell, and I know it's been a very tiring experience, a very exhausting experience. We're gonna lay down some groundwork required for you to understand what these people went through to present this game to us. So, Archangel Studios is a 3-people studio, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just 3. It's you, your bro, and your best friend, from what
Yes.
I've been reading.
Yeah, let's put it that way. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't hang out physically very much with my best friend, but we talk every single day. That's Roya.
It's a soul bro.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Our digital soulmates.
Okay, so at some point in life, you decided, the 3 of you, to make a huge ass expansive action RPG without any additional help from outside, which was the blessed/accursed year that led to this decision. How many years ago?
That's a good. I'm very, very bad with calendars, and it was, I think, as abrupt as it was a decision, it was incremental in some aspects. So what initially started as a project that I was doing alone, and it was much less ambitious because it was just a comic book or like a graphic novel. I had this kind of experience, and I think it was 2018 at this point was when I made the decision to switch mediums and try my hand at game dev. I did solo dev for a little bit. That's when I opened the Twitter and all these things. It was right when I graduated college, and I did that for about a year. And that was a time when I was really just kind of getting to know what game dev even is, if this is even possible as a project. And I was restarting the project a lot and kind of redefining, letting, I guess, the medium influence where I'm going to go with what's going on. And then after that first initial year, I think I had garnered enough knowledge where what I was making was starting to show up on people's radars locally, this and that. And then my brother reached out to me and said he knew a friend who has a friend. It's literally
a friend of a friend.
Friend of a friend. Yeah, there's a friend of a friend who is a programmer, and he was just described to me as he's a guy who also just works his butt off and is just the kind of guy who you might want to at least meet and talk to. And honestly, people have introduced me to a lot of people in my life for various reasons, whatever, and this was probably one of the most accurate descriptions, where I'm always a little bit skeptic because I'm a very diligent worker. I have a kind of very strong idea of what a work ethic should be like and everything. But then meeting this guy, Mirko, or as people know him online, Roya, was definitely one of those moments of okay, I've definitely met somebody who is pretty much as crazy as I am when it comes to these things. Does not care about Saturdays, Sundays,
survival
7 days a week, every single day of the year. Even if you're not at the PC, you're always thinking about work, and that's the kind of people that you need for things like this. So once we got together, we had a kind of hey, why don't we set aside our personal passion projects and start something new. We brainstormed for a couple of days. We came up with a small idea, started doing that, and both of us being this kind of personality, we're okay, we finished that in like 3 months, that little project. We even published it on itch actually, and then we were just like, this just isn't it. Like this is not ambitious enough. Like it was a kind of little like 3D simulator game about like life in the office. It was a kind of funny, like satirical, dark humor, so to speak, kind of game. And we were just like, you know what? Why don't we just take something that's a little bit more engaged? And we spoke a little bit about his project at the time and what I was working on with Bleak Faith. And we leaned towards this because I had a slightly more defined, at the moment, like artistic vision as the artist on the team. So it was easier to kind of see and stand behind a project that was there already atmospherically and artistically. So we were like, hey, let's jump on Bleak Faith. Let's reawaken the project and start that. So the two of us were pretty much the core of the team for the first 2 years. My brother was there mostly in those moments for generally for like just support. Obviously, my family's very close, so we had a kind of. He always knew what I was working on anyways, but it wasn't that he was all hands on deck type. He had his own projects and things that he was working on. But we did collaborate together for the Kickstarter campaign. And then we didn't for a little bit, and then later it kind of made sense when his own projects kind of like fizzled out. We were like, that was maybe, I believe about 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago. Where we were like, okay, we're doing everything, all hands on deck, all three of us. And then we started kind of, it's a little bit chaotic because this is mid-project, when you're adding people, changing, relegating roles, who's going to do what, who's going to scale up, because we were also in the process of getting better at the things that we're doing and learning what we're supposed to actually be doing. So in that process, it's also figuring out like, okay, who's going to learn what then? Since we don't have a lot of people, everyone
you had to learn whilst hands-on. You had to learn how to use certain aspects of the tech.
Yes. Everything was, and I'm sure that people who have played everything in those moments, the prototypes that released post Kickstarter and everything, we kind of dove into a lot of these things with like, we have a huge challenge ahead of us. Now you have to figure out how to solve it, and that's given us a lot of confidence. To this day, I take, and all three of us take a lot of pride, but I would say especially Roya and myself, when it comes to like technical challenges, that to this day there's not been a single thing that we didn't figure out within a span of like 2 to 3 weeks. Now maybe we didn't pull it off perfectly, but there is that kind of like, how do you even go about doing these things, you know? And I think we got the confidence to kind of know that, okay, if we set our minds to it, if we really engage, you know, all 8 cores, multi-threaded logic and reasoning, we can kind of get to a point where we can pretty much solve and tackle any technical issue, which then naturally makes you go, wait, we can make anything. Like, why are we even? So then it was this kind of like ambition creep a little bit at times, where you're like, oh, why don't we do this and this and this and that. We did still have a kind of good grounded idea of where we're going, but at the same time, like once you unlock that in yourself and you're like, wow, we're really able to pick up and fill every role that we need for the ideas that we have, you're kind of like growing with your own projects, but with your own capabilities as well. And I would say really in the last 2 years was when we kind of had a stronger defined idea of exactly who does what. And even now, post launch and everything, I think those things have kind of crystallized, because naturally you have a studio and then now people have to take care of business things, of this and that. And we do all of that together inside internally. So promotional material as well, you know, like it's things like that. Like our marketing team is my brother and myself. Our development team is Mirko and myself, you know, it's that kind of, our business dev team is my dad and me, like that kind of like very everyone's very like engaged in pretty much every aspect of what's going on to various degrees. But that's a kind of short end of a lot of this stuff. That, of course, it's very fluid still, but I think at this point we're pretty comfortable with who does what, how. We're like a kind of well-oiled machine when it comes to, yeah. implementing things.
So to break it down and try digesting it, you're the lead designer, mostly concerned with the game and the gameplay and the art more than anything else. And Mirko is the main programmer, and Martel, like your brother, was the composer mostly and
Yes.
handled stuff of the lore. Now, guys, to let you understand what we're talking about, the tune you're listening to right now was composed by Martel. He composed like 3 albums worth of music for the game, and every single track in that OST is sublime. I highly recommend you check him out on Bandcamp and his YouTube. Like, the music he composed for Bleak Faith is uncontestedly one of the best I've heard, not only in the genre, in gaming in general. And it was genius that you went for an approach like the music is always accompanying you, like the soundtrack is playing in the background whilst you're exploring. It gives the game that very dreamy feel. That excitement about discovery is accompanied by, appropriate music. It's much better than a droning ambience that most games use, like you have some ambience in the background, you just move around. Here you hear track after track after track while you're traversing the Omni structure, and it's extremely captivating. The music was a huge part of this, at least in my humble opinion. When it comes to you breaking down the technical difficulties and the aspects of this thing, I was there since day one when you first released the game, and the progress made since then is mind-boggling. Like, you iron out most of the kinks, and you're talking about work ethic, but this must have been slave driving for both of you, like the amount of work that must have gone in there. Because I remember there was no fast slide down a ladder in the original, and you had those mythical ladders in the game where it would be like a minute of climbing down or climbing up. And the first moment I witnessed that initial ladder there in the monastery, in the starting area, I was like, these guys are either incredibly incompetent or they have a very uncompromised creative vision here, because the Omni structure is as treacherous a world as it gets. Nothing there was designed for the leisure of the inhabitants. It's pretty much techno hell. And they would force you to climb up and down for a couple of minutes because they don't give a rat's ass about how the Forsaken would feel in that environment. So that's one of the things that captivated me from the get-go, the sheer scale and how unwelcoming it all was. But you had to iron out a lot of kinks. I sent countless messages throughout this 1.5 years about stuff I nitpicked throughout my playthroughs, and I let the game to bake for a bit after a while. Like, I finished it a few times and then I left it. I was like, I'm coming back after a while to see what changed. And when I came back, my mind was blown by the progress that was made. So, taking a cue out of my notes, and I'm gonna lay it very raw. Like, what were you thinking when you went from simulating the workspace humor to such an expansive, all bets are off thing with 2 people programming it? Like, the ambition is insane when it comes to how the game was designed. The world is huge. There is a ton of loot hidden behind small crevices and openings and all that. From what I understand, you went with the dynamic loot pool, so if I had found big ass sword in loot drop 1, then the loot in the crevice on the other side of the planet that would hold the sword would hold like a consumable or something. So the locations of the actual loot spawns are hand placed in this huge ass environment. What were you thinking, man? What was the idea behind this whole thing?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind. You were definitely hit the nail on the head a few times with and it's interesting in designing some of these things that are they're definitely larger than life, and that's one of the things that we were thinking was that the strange feeling that. Like a lack of achievement of finishing that initial project of the workplace. It was called Office Man, by the way.
Is it available? Can someone find it and play it?
Yeah, funnily. But also, we even still have our server from that. So we have two different development servers, and one is from that. And it's endearing sometimes to go back and see a past version of ourselves, like initial kind of scared devs who did not make this kind of chaotic, fever dream of architectural, whatever you'd like to call it. So it is really interesting to see how quickly that shift changed, but it was because life informed a lot of those things. I think in both each our own ways, and of course, not to put credit or like give credit to myself or anything, but it is like the artistic vision is something that informs everything down the ladder. So it was really important that idea, whatever the vision was that we decided for a project, carried a lot of emotion. And so basically where I was in my life at that point was informing and was such a strong, I would say, oppressive, but also heightened emotional state that a lot of these things were just coming out instinctually. A lot of these decisions were pretty much, and I was just like, I'm gonna go follow these feelings, see where they take me, and go there. And not to say that Mirko was in any better life situation. So I think that kind of informed, like, you're in a strange place, and when you find the strength to kind of override the otherwise difficulties that are surrounding you, that starts to become like I'm sure people are going to love this, it starts to be your firelink shrine kind of thing. You're in the middle of this chaotic place, but suddenly there's something somehow soothing about taking control and taking action in one aspect of your life, right? And it becomes almost intoxicating, where you are everywhere else in life, you're getting slapped around by systems, by things in place that you have no control over. And then for the first time, you're able to build a world, right? Once that kind of sets in, I think it overtakes in a way that was both the best coping mechanism and the best therapy, and also the most challenging possible thing to do. So it was the kind of thing where it's so exhausting and tiring that you don't even have time to worry about other problems in your life, right? So in that kind of way, you sidestepped into like a safe place to be challenged and to feel that kind of thing. And I think that is written all over every single wall, every ladder that's there.
Well, it's very bleak.
There is also the kind of like, like what you're saying, there's a kind of interesting aspect to the architecture in the world where, architecture that we experience in a day-to-day life, it can cause a lot of emotions, it can cause a lot of things, but one thing that it doesn't do usually, maybe art installations sometimes do these things, but for the most part, architecture is generally structures that are designed for people, right? And when it kind of hit me that there's this whole side of like conceptual architecture that is anti-design, that is not for people, that is not to make you feel nice, that is not, those questions then were just so fascinating to explore, because you start to ask yourself, like, when do you look at a building and you say, crap, I do not want to do, like, when, a building that gives you megalophobia, a building that gives you claustrophobia, a structure that makes you feel, a structure that gives you thalassophobia, like that plays with your fears, not your comforts.
We're gonna go there in a minute.
Yeah, it's things that you can't really do there. So that's the kind of thing with like the ladder and everything. It's like you start to kind of push the bounds of what would this world. And that's the kind of world building moment where, like, a lot of people sit down and start writing the history of their world. They're like, and then this happened, and then King Osgamor slayed the beast, and then, he had a daughter, and da-da-da, and they go, that's most of how we experience how world building happens. And with technology improving, in the last 10 years, stratospherically and exponentially, there's such a wide tool set now with which you can use to create things, right? To create visions and things, and at the same time to world build. So with us, I think one of the unique things that happened was that my main world building tool was like the emotional connection that you have with the 3D aspect of the world, right? Like that's kind of the crux of what's informing everything else. It is kind of like you throw a challenge at the people who inhabit your world, and then you build around that, but you're mostly building that challenge the whole time, and it is just fluidly creating everything else. So that's kind of that then becomes so much more interesting and compelling than what was the initial project, which was very palatable. It was very easy to kind of be to control and to be like, ah, yes, it's a guy who's going to go to an office and he has 7 days to get a promotion, or he fails the game. It's very easy to wrap your head around. But this was suddenly like, it was fresh every single day coming to work. You don't know the way that the work is going to surprise you, and learning to kind of let the designs breathe and inform you was probably some of the most like life-changing design experience. I mean, not probably, it is definitely the most life-changing design experience I've ever had, and I can't even guarantee that I could do it again, like in terms of if I had to go through the same thing again. It was a very difficult process to go through for all of us. So now we have the skill set, and now it's like, now we can comfortably dive into those emotions with the whole skill set design around that. But juggling both of those, like building the skill set while being like barraged by these ideas all the time, it is not for the faint of heart. So we definitely had some divine intervention or
yeah, it's like
that kind of
the crux of inspiration is not something you can orchestrate. It just coalesces and happens.
Exactly, it's very emergent narrative, so to speak.
For me, one of the most amazing things to witness in this game is the scale, like the scope, the insanity of the size. And I remember when I first got into Block and I saw all those Eastern European brutalist-inspired structures around, like the buildings, the residential quote-unquote buildings, and I'm like, no one actually lives in there, like, right? Like, the calamity has struck, there are no people living there. Are people living there? Are these creatures living there? And it was the obscurity of it all that makes it so enticing, it's so charming. And I was like, even if I can't get into this guy's home, before all this went to hell, they were etching out some kind of existence, and now that is gone, like everything was taken away because of the anomaly. And it was fascinating just to traverse the environment and not tackle the challenge specifically, but just to live in there and realize that you're sharing in the vision of a person who very organically put all this together. So I suppose since you're the, let's say, artistic director of the whole project, your hand was the one holding the pen most of the time. And I can see like certain inspiration, like I think you drew a lot from Blame, known as Blama, the manga. There's a lot of the subgenre called Slav junk in the game, you know, the rough strokes and all that. And it draws heavily from specific aspects. You draw a shed load of stuff from Berserk, of course, because we always have to draw some stuff from Berserk because of how glorious it is. But some of the stuff is like an homage, like the Rider. Some of the stuff is more subtle. When you started, the superstructurism, like the thing itself, do you think that the idea was drawn directly from something, or is it something that fascinates you personally, having grown up reading these things, and you're like, I'm gonna craft my own superstructure world, like from nothing?
Yeah, I think that, and this is the kind of like intimate journey that you have to have, like these things that you see and they kind of fascinate you. So, for example, Blame, and Nihei's work, you can never recreate another art, and that level of fascination, when you're fascinated like that, it's very hard to recreate that for yourself if you're just copying things, right? So you can draw the concept from it. Now, it's not like Nihei invented superstructures and megastructures and stuff. Those terms all existed well before him. Megalopolis is a Greek word. These ideas have been around for a very long time, right? And himself, for example, draws from Piranesi, from Geiger, from there's tons of people that came before him as well, and people before them that have built, but that was, for example, the kind of trigger point for me to look at, because I was coming off the tail end of, I finished school, I interned a little bit in an architecture company, and we've had, like, in our family always one my grandpa from my dad's side was an architect, for example. We had like a lot of architects in our family anyway, so architecture was always a kind of important aspect. So it was only a matter of time before something just like went like, why don't we make a whole world that's like this? But the issue is, that's not enough to build a world, right? Because you don't have anything to anchor yourself around other than fascination. You're going to look at that and just be like, whoa, that's so cool, but what exactly? You know, like, what is it about that? And then finding what it is in your voice that's making you so fascinated is what gives you then your version of all of those things, right? Your idea of a structure that's larger than life. And then you realize, well, that's not anyone's idea specifically. That's just an aspect of architecture. So, for example, for me, and I was just having this conversation last night with a friend, actually. So, a childhood friend. I am in my childhood home right now, which is in Block. That's what it's called. The place is called. We call this Block. It's Block 6 and Block 5 across from us. And they have a kind of mythical status for all the kids that have grown up here and everything. And I was explaining to my friend the other day how I lived on the 5th floor. So I have a view of a bunch of balconies off the side of mine, and it's a rather intimate view into other. So not only do you see their balconies, but you can get to see in their dining room, the kitchen area, and a sliver of a living room, right? So not the most intimate aspects of people's lives, but a routine aspect of their life. You get a clear view of that. Now, when I was explaining this, I'm like, I know this sounds like kind of creepy, but it really is not, because it's like, as a child, I used to like stand there and look at this stuff, and it was what you were describing
Standard
earlier.
Eastern European intimacy, we're gonna call it.
It is this kind of, there is a voyeuristic aspect to it, but not a sexual one. It's not like a, ooh, wow, like let me catch something, like, it's not that part of somebody's private life. It is really just the kind of the mundanity of existence. The cool thing about that is that in the process of you as a viewer being there, and as a kid, like, I'm just kind of bored, like looking at like what people are doing. You're looking at all these people kind of live their lives, and one thing that's abundantly clear is that you're not a part of that. And you're seeing them laughing, you're seeing them having fights, you're seeing like doing all these things that you're not a part of. And it's very humbling, because it makes you think, it makes you wonder, like, look at all these people who are palpably just moving on. They don't even know that you're there, right? And that kind of interesting, like, almost, you build strong empathy for them, but you're not in the there is none of your ego in that picture, because you're not playing a role in that life, right? You are when you're outside, but not in that space, right? And they don't even know that you're in some way a spectator to that space, right? So it's definitely a strange, like, side effect of like these buildings that are like towering buildings, like right next to each other and everything. But then you'll find that there's a lot of these views, and it was incredibly important for me to figure out what technique they used for Spider-Man. The cube, when you look inside of someone's like balcony in these Spider-Man games, and there's that, like, if you move around, there's a parallax effect going on that looks like there's an interior in there. So every one of the interiors in Bleak Faith had to be that, because I like that idea of like this perspective that when you're outside looking in, the outside looking in feeling, like that emotion, right? And then I realized, like, this is the emotion that's driving my
The way you did it, although you don't have actual, access to what is inside, the way you implemented it actually feels like this was someone's something at some point, like an office place or a house or whatever, and now it's just this hellscape. And it was very interesting. One thing I want to touch upon for 1 second.
Yeah.
The ambience of totally empty spaces. I'm talking like buildings, submerged buildings, buildings in open spaces, buildings in, let's say, in the upper block, for example. There is a lot of space, but in those buildings you can't actually find anything. It's like you very early teach the player, don't bother going in there. You won't find anything in there, because you will check one building, you'll check two buildings, might be 10 stories tall, without loot, without enemies, without anything. Why did you feel it was so important to include those empty spaces into the game?
Yeah, that's a good question. Because there's a very specific reason, actually, and finally there has been a tug of war of, okay, fine, let me slightly kind of influence those initial decisions. But the initial decision and why those places were designed that way was, first, I don't like the current trend of over gamifying worlds. I think it impedes and it undermines proper world building, right? So that's the difference between world building and game building, in my opinion. So you can be designing a game to be gamey the whole time, or you can be designing a world. And I think that finding a balance of sometimes reminding people that, to make them question, like, was the dev even here? You know, sometimes it's very clear where the dev's hand was, and then in those moments, the idea behind that is that you're like, but why is this even here? Why was this not designed, so to speak? And that's part of, again, the kind of like the negative space, so to speak, of like, if you make a drawing, the negative space is just as important as it's the silhouette, the stuff that isn't there, that maybe you'd expect is there, but is also informing the stuff that is, right? So in those moments, to me, any one of the places that are like that are purely to give you a different perspective of the world. Like the reward there is your place in that world. The reward there is you just being, getting another view, another chance to sit there, and while you're asking, why didn't I receive anything, you're still soaking in a different angle of everything that's going on here, and retracing your steps as well. You know, a lot of these times when it's like a big tower or something, you get to see where you were from 5 different angles, 10, 15 sometimes, you know, and I think that's a really nice way to start to empathize with the space, right? Because now you're occupying it from different angles. So that's the short end of the...
Man, this is glorious. This is glorious because I'm an advocate of the medium as a way to tell stories without necessarily relying on the direct involvement of the player. You know, the world pre-existing shouldn't just cater to you. The world was there, and one of the most awe-inspiring moments in this game, I don't know if you did this intentionally, if it just happened or the way I experienced it, when you get to Deluge, it's like a port, let's say, it's a port area, and I defeat the first enemy, and they drop a driver's lung concoction. That is a consumable that allows you to breathe pretty much for a set amount of time underwater. I'm like, there's no way they went there. These 3 people starting their careers, they present this open, watery space as a backdrop for sure. Like, there can't be anything else to this. And I get this, which implies there is swimming in the game, in this game made by 3 people. And then I jump into the water and I see the submerged city, and I almost peed my pants. I was like, this is so grandiose, and it must have taken so much work to put here. And Deluge is there just for one reason. I'm not gonna spoil anything. Deluge is there for one reason. You went through all this work just to do the one thing, the one thing that can take the player 5 minutes. If they don't want to explore, they can just go whoop, and get it done. And that pretty much was like one of the proving factors that said there was an uncompromising creative vision here that took a lot of effort to materialize. Because, and I'm not gonna play the devil's advocate here, I'm a content creator, I make vids, I go into the editor, I spend countless hours like cutting and stitching things together, so I will be able to present something that's viewable. Your work is infinitely more complex. People just get stuck on the end product of something, and they will judge it, and they will judge it harshly most of the time, because, you know, people who usually don't create judge the harshest. There is a Greek saying about this, but I don't think it's gonna be relayed through the English narration that we're doing here. So if there is no corpo involvement in a project like this, if it's just the people who have this passion about the creation and they want to present something unique and fresh, and their idea, at the end of the day, their expression, there is no malevolent intent. Like, if something doesn't work ideally or wasn't implemented ideally, it doesn't mean that you're the devil and you're trying to trick someone, or you're like, you know what, I'm gonna make this space here not because I have something to say about the art form, but because I want to waste your time, because I'm an asshole. Like, people don't grasp that. So, on talking about uncompromising vision, initially you had like a climb any surface mechanic in the game. Okay, it was back in the day of the uncapped frame rate. I remember the stuff that stemmed from the uncapped frame rate era, because in this game, with its geometry, having uncapped frame rate was like a nightmare for you. I remember those days. But that climb any surface mechanic was subsequently just removed because it was a logistical nightmare. Do you think that removing some aspects from the game that weren't exactly behaving the way you wanted was a compromise, quote unquote, or you were like, we're gonna improve our creation, we're gonna do this consciously, we're gonna remove this stuff consciously, so it is ultimately a better, not product, because that's a diminishing word, it's a better game than what we initially had in our hands?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. There definitely is a degree of, for the people who are willing to kind of bear with, this is the first project, this is that, I think it was easier to digest some of these things. But there was a lot of flack that we were getting as well, for sometimes for a good reason, sometimes for no reason at all. And I think there was a certain amount of, like you said, like it was a logistical nightmare in a certain sense, and it's too good of an idea, and it's too important to be implemented in a way that's that is constantly causing down the line a lot of overhead issues. And that's the kind of point where, you know, you have to swallow your pride. You have to be like, I know that we did this and we just made a mistake, right? For maybe taking a little bite that's way too big right now, but down the line, that is definitely an important thing. And it is completely in line with if it's undermining the vision itself. Like, for example, what you're describing with Underwater World, a lot of those things are, for example, exactly, because you were asking, was that by design, was that intentional, not, or yes, it was, right? It was a very, I've always seen it and viewed that, the area in the sky, these things, they were the kinds of moments that were like, we're going the extra mile, and these are simply our ideas. This is not something that I'm, you know, and it is sad because it falls on deaf ears a lot of times. People like don't even know that there is swimming because they didn't even get to that point, for example. But that kind of, yeah, it's not that we're gonna put swimming now on 60 different locations and there's gonna be all these little side quests that keep sending you down to the bottom of some body of water or something. It's fine for it to just be that one time and for you to be like, whoa, that was like
serve its
a dream
purpose
at this point, you know? Yeah, and it's all that work then just for those 5 minutes, and you're like, yeah, all that work for those 5 minutes.
Yeah, man, that is
fantastic.
fantastic.
They're unscripted. And for some people, it doesn't even feel that way, but for the people that it does, that unscripted, you have the agency in that moment. It's not a scripted scene. It's not anything like that. You get a chance to live in that for a moment. And I think that's priceless. And that's why, for example, with the climbing, I think it was one too many bites and one too many things to incorporate in that, where not enough people were getting that out of it. You know what I mean? It was that kind of moment where this might just be better to serve somewhere down the line and properly implement and tackle than just ham-fisting as much stuff just to try and be like, oh, we're, you know, we can do this, we can do that. So that it's a kind of, it's a difficult thing to do, of course. You know, a lot of learning experiences and a lack of experience as well sometimes to implement something and then have to take it out and this, that. So we do what we can, but it is definitely, navigating that is a tricky road.
Man, it was a labyrinth for sure, and you came out the other side mostly intact. About the architecture now, we're talking about like maybe having to exclude some things or include some things and all that. When it comes to the technical implication of designing an interconnected world of this scale.
The audio cut out. Sorry, you just repeat that.
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
When it comes to designing an interconnected world like that, Okay. Was all this interconnectivity done by hand, or were you assisted by some tool that I don't know about?
No. I initially started designing and programming some procedural tools, two of which got used, but they were for like beautifying things. They were not there to define the rough edge. So somewhere in the long, and a lot of people are like, oh, why did some of these open areas disappear, this, that? A lot of those areas were actually using generated content. And then somewhere down the line, I just realized, I'm like, I think I'm building this entire world by hand. And it was, I love that decision. It was so chaotically draining. I cannot describe to you, for example, how Rain District, it is probably, it does not matter. I think it gets even, it's a complicated world to begin with. It has a very nice, you know, circular kind of relation to itself. Being in that level with no clip on, where you get to go through the walls, is the most nauseating and insane thing to possibly do. And I love that. It was like such a big skill challenge on a development side, because you're trying to wrap your head around so many different little shortcuts, things that are connected and everything, and you're like, but where does this connect to the big world? Now, where is that connecting to that stuff?
Yes.
Some of those connections were even cut out, right? So there were some things that at some point I was like, I just can't even handle this amount of pressure anymore. So, but I've learned a ton doing that, right? So, but every one of those was purely put there by hand and completely in design. Like, that was always the idea of, some people are going to get to this world from this side, some people are going to get to it from a completely different one. And the more of that happens, the better, but so long as those are kind of designed paths, right? So you're not just, it's not a completely open world and you can come at a village from like 360 degrees around it. It's 5 or 6 angles, for example. And that was the kind of like idea, like finding a sweet spot that I could manage at the time. But if you ask me now, I'm like, I would add even more, honestly. I would do even crazier. There was, like, for example, one map that I had to cut out that was an almost like antonym to the hub district, right? That served as a kind of like anti-hub, like the shadow of a hub, and it was also connected to everything. And there was this idea of like, what if someone stumbles in this area first and think that this is the hub to the world? And I'm like, I love that. That's great. That's amazing. Like,
but imagine the connections that have to be made.
Yeah. Oh, trust me, I did. There was a time when I just could not focus at all in my life, generally, in my real life. Like, I try and go to the gym at least. I cannot do a rep. I'm just like, just staring like at a wall, just completely in a different world, literally. So it was so consuming, but so much fun as well. And I think that's the kind of trade-off that I love, like handcrafted giant open worlds. Like, that is to me where my heart is at, and I would love to keep kind of playing with that formula as much as I can.
I have to give a shout out now to the OG players of Bleak Faith, because I'll get a snippet out of what you said. I don't have footage to show. It would be nice if I had some footage to show here. The thing you cut, and that is very perceivable, is the Silent Hill place. Man, I stumbled upon that in my first playthrough, and I'm like, okay, this is an homage or something that was created entirely out of left field. And now you're saying like it's procedurally generated stuff that just ended up in there. Man, it was such a fever dream to go through that.
You want to know an interesting thing about, and this is something that that area specifically, like the railway where it leads, is the street outside of this building, and that set of buildings is the one place that is identical to a real world location.
Oh my, this is so good, man. Like, we're making history here today.
Yeah. And if I added on to why Silent Hill was a reference, I'm saying this is like a thread that connects down to my experience in elementary school, which is also a school that is included in that level. But it's like very fractal, by the way. I love fractals. I love this idea of like repeating patterns and stuff, and once I realized to embrace that instead of run away from it, where initially as an inexperienced version of myself, I was like running away from me, you know. I was like, let me do something that somebody, and then it was just like, no, like actually listen to what your life was and build it, like keep building it, keep polishing it until something manifests out of that. So that's a little bit of trivia you're gonna have on your content.
This is
that
great,
actual
man.
location is a real location, and when it gets foggy here, then you understand completely. It's like, this was one-to-one a real place that you put inside of the, which is why it was not a gamey moment either. People are like, why aren't there enemies here or this or that? I'm like, that was not the, initially you weren't even supposed to like leave the train, but you know, gamers will be gamers, and I love that about it. So many people have screenshots of that location when really it was the most kind of, I'm gonna build a part of the city that's going to be that's gonna mean something to me, right? That's gonna be very, and then but of course it has to have the logic and make sense in the rest of the world and everything. But that part itself was almost like an Easter egg, and so many people went there. Also, when we used to have the like you're saying, the OG one, when there was the bridge the other way.
Yeah.
It was important to me that bridge was walkable initially, but then it was causing a lot of like streaming issues with the level. But when you were able to, for someone to just go like, you know what, instead of continuing my adventure right now, of course I'm gonna jump on this one tightrope railway
and go into nothingness.
Run in that direction for however, and then it's like, no, you're gonna get to another level by doing that. Actually, that to me is peak level design. I freaking love things like that, and every moment where we had to curb that a little bit, I put that into my little like vengeance list of like, we're gonna do this again, but it'll be flawless, you know what I mean? Like, it'll be completely supported by the system, by everything. Because that was my little like, you should run down that railway thinking, no, like really? And
yes,
then by minute
exactly.
like 3-4, you're like, really? Like, I can still keep running down this thing? And then at some point when you run and you're like, no, don't tell me that the dev this whole time was like applauding me secretly by putting this railway here for the like in the first place, but never actually cluing you in. There's no light leading you anywhere. It doesn't look appealing. It's a very low poly model itself. So that kind of question of like, is this allowed at all? That to me is beautiful design, honestly. And that was the idea behind that, is like that someone should finish this and be like, am I allowed to be here? Or was this okay? Like, am I transgressing in some kind of way design-wise or anything? Yeah.
Another content creator that I appreciate for their work once said in a vid about a Ubisoft game that was like, you know, one of those nothing live service games that they try to hook people into. And it was like, I don't want to play video game to pass the time. I play video games to feel something. And there was a lot of feeling included in my time with the game. Like, sometimes it was frustration, sometimes it was awe, sometimes it was like wonder. But it is certainly a game that comes from people living, breathing, non-corpo human beings to the people experiencing it. And it is my comfort game for the past year. Just playing again and again and traversing, and sometimes you go in with a patch, add something somewhere, and I'm like, I never found this. This is great. One of the biggest wins for the way you developed the game and improved the game was that the people who really loved interacting with the content and came back after a little amount of time, a small amount of time, they would just find something new and be like, this is insane. Like the deluge area we mentioned, there is an underwater dive that takes you to a very small dungeon side, and I'm like, I never found this. This is amazing. Right. Yeah. So the incremental additions of content actually helped the game realize its potential in a way that just happened, I suppose, kind of accidentally, because you were improving it and adding stuff and all that. So the world of Bleak Faith has a very minimalistic narrative, how should I put it, direction, but there is something there. There is something, it's not all up in the air. Like, there is a theocracy, conflicting factions, and the little lore bits that you added recently hint towards these things. It's not as open to interpretation as it was in the past. Like, you actually put some guidelines there now. You're like, you know, conflicting factions, because the environment's so shifting, the way the factions themselves handle the place entails a lot of confusion. No one really knows what this is, where we are. Are you gonna stay in universe for future projects? Like, are you gonna expand on the universe of the Omni structure, or are you gonna go an entirely different direction?
The idea was always to build up and expand the story of the Omni structure itself, and I think that can come out in a lot of different angles. But I think the real strength of it is, and again, that even in the little kinds of aspects, like the little changes, incremental and stuff, that's a kind of embracing as well of the Omni structure itself, and the feeling that, you know, if you have played it over the course of its update season and everything, and like from launch day to the release, the little feel, it's an interesting thing, because within the lore is also the idea that, like, in the anomaly and around it, your perception is not very objective, right? It is even more subjective than it usually is, because and it's hard to trust yourself. Like, even yourself is a kind of unreliable narrator. And like when it kind of dawned on me that, like, small subtle changes that are actually unrelated to like bug fixing or anything, but that just change the angle in which you perceive something, you start to create a duality in the player himself, right? Where, you know, you have a player who sees a certain area but remembers it differently. Mm-hmm. But not just because they remember it differently, and they have now, there's an argument internally happening with, like, no, this area was this thing before, but now it's this thing, right? And
the
it's not
patching process is the anomaly.
No, that was the kind of, like, you know, this is a neat way to have a kind of like meta narrative and a meta explanation and an addition to the Omni structure of, like, the things are shifting so much that even sometimes the stroke of the dev has slightly changed, and you're like, hey, like, that's what else is changing in this kind of thing. And I think that's a kind of interesting way to move away from this idea of, like, to use the ability that you can update games these days, that the technology allows you to go further, to come back and change stuff and everything, but not turn it into like a live service and some, I should say, almost like predatory, like, yes, like, put more money and you'll get more skins.
Come back,
like it's like, no, like, come, let's yeah, exactly. It's like, let's kind of like mold the narrative a little bit and massage your memories of this world, you know, like, that to me is like, that's a great way to actually use this idea of like live updates, of coming back for more, of doing things. So sprinkling those in with the amount of free time that we had was always enjoyable, as of course I would have loved even more of those things, but, you know, as time is, it is definitely sometimes difficult to juggle all of those, but it definitely was coming out of a very real place to say more in the narrative, you know. So that is an actual lore tool itself. Then on the other hand, there is definitely what you were saying. There is a structure here, and it is a plot, and it does play into a much larger narrative anyways. So a lot of things. Now, how we did the comic, there's a short, like, 20-page comic. It's a one-shot that's going to go for the retail version of these things. It is also a full circle moment with how the project started itself. And then it's like, well, yeah, let's keep doing this for the future as well. Let's not just make a game. Let's actually focus on the world itself and how we're gonna communicate that.
Brother, I'm very happy for what you just said about the continuity of the world, because there are worlds in games that deserve to be expanded upon. I was talking to another small studio recently. I was doing some alpha testing for them for a project. Like, they went from a cosmic horror sci-fi setting to a medieval setting with the other project they're handling, and I was like, man, this is fine, but I was born in the late 80s, and I went through the Lord of the Rings craze in the early 2000s, and I don't need another horse. I don't need another wraith. Can we have something else? Can we have, like, superstructure, steampunk? Can we have post-apocalyptic in our action RPGs, you know? Like, no more medieval. And this is such a unique presentation, such a unique setting. I 100% feel like you should go for it and expand upon it. A very specific question. There was an obnoxious presence in the world that got toned down significantly since the game came out, and it's those floating ghosts.
Uh-huh.
People were going furious over those because they could trap you in a corner and they would just kill you because they were draining your life so fast, and people were like, why are these suckers here? What are they? Like, can we talk about them?
Yeah. So, the one thing, there is always this that I liked as a concept. I can give you what the concept was behind the design of the enemy itself. There is a kind of they're meant to, well, one, they're ghosts, right? They're ghosts of part of the anomaly. Now, I won't say how they get created or anything like that. There is lore behind them. You only experience their manifestation in the way that they work, but they're intended there to kind of keep you on your toes and second guess yourself a little bit. They are frustrating. They've killed me a bunch of times as well. I'm like, God damn it, I forget it was there. And it's I think it's part and parcel of existing in a kind of oppressive and aggressive world, is like to sometimes have dangers that you get so used to chasing, like, that's the enemy, that's that, and then sometimes it just blindsides you entirely, and it reminds you to, like, I have to also pay attention to things that are not easily perceptible. So that's the kind of the logic behind that was to ensure that the world reminds you and puts you in a similar playing field where the inhabitants themselves have gone through. So it speaks to a player in a kind of like, it makes you empathize a little bit with there's a lot of stuff going on here, and not a lot of it is on your side. Yeah.
One more thing that I wanted to touch upon, because people feel the need for closure in art. What happened in the end? Which I think it's totally detrimental. Like, I am here to experience the media, not necessarily to get on the answers by the end, And I suppose that's something you had in mind as well, because, yeah, we go through a set of tasks, have some interactions, but many things are left up in the air, not as ambiguous as some people think, because there are the breadcrumbs there to just, piece together some sort of understanding of what's happening. I love the ending of the game. I love the winks towards beloved media from the past, from the late 90s. And I suppose some of the things that you say you've put in place already, like lore about the ghosts, will eventually at some point throughout your career of expanding this be touched upon and explained. Do you think, though, that maybe some characters' involvement in the events that unfold could be expanded a bit upon, like in the near future? Like Yuri, for example, it is the commander woman that we meet early on. Like, you retooled her model recently, very good additions, by the way. You eventually have an interaction with her, let's say, and not with her alone. But what you actually interact with at that point in the game, still, after all the lore additions, we have very little info. Mm-hmm. So do you think that this is something that will be fleshed out in the near future, or like the existence of X, like the X or Y entity, will be left totally ambiguous for a future iteration of the world you're building?
So in terms of expanding the lore and what where we're planning on going with these things, I think definitely if anything's introduced in the story, for example, that's just a little bit confusing, it's because the focus is on the protagonist's experience in the game, the collector, and their perspective, right?
Would you call the Forsaken we control the collector, or the Dreamweaver, as he's called by a certain character?
I think that all depends on who's talking about.
Man, I have some theories about what's actually happening here, grand scale. Yeah. And it's so exciting to think about that stuff. How entropy goes into this, because you can, contract entropy, and then if you die enough times to the Vermilion Knights, you lose your save. Well, you have to die 400 times, but Yeah, it is.
It's
It is
there. Yeah,
a
it's
looming
possible,
danger
yeah.
there. Yeah.
I'm actually particularly proud about that decision. I think that was one of a very kind of slightly thinking outside the box for what is a lore, potentially like a lore stipulation there that is kind of hard sometimes to showcase in a game, right? You're like, it's a game. You're playing, I don't know. You have to suspend your disbelief sometimes a lot, and it's very rare that a design in a game kind of winks at the lore, and it's like, no, this is actually still makes lore sense.
Yeah, to
and you
make
don't have
sense.
to be over suspending disbelief in some
To
kind of
make
scenario.
sense, the overarching world has to. How do I put it? Certain rules have to apply, and because entropy is the inability to translate energy into mechanical work. Like, I'm not an engineer, but that is like the broad stroke of the theorem. It's like, if this is the case of what I think is happening here, like, things are not exactly how they seem, and it's extremely interesting to think like that.
Yeah, I think, and this will tie together actually with what you said earlier. But yeah, there's definitely, things aren't just introduced just to be there, and there are. That's the thing, not just to create like a plot twist or something, but sometimes the introduction of an X factor that wasn't even hinted on, or was hinted on but in a vague way where you're just not really sure what exactly is going on. And a lot of these things, I think the way that the story progresses and where it goes, I would definitely say is very unexpected. It's not like a run-of-the-mill, like, yes, this is... The way it culminates is just in a really strange turn of events that, definitely require some form of expanding on. But if you look at it in a vacuum of what happens in the story, the arc is over, right? Like, that arc kind of culminates and has its own resolution. So definitely a larger plot than people are usually used to in this kind of genre. But when it comes to what you said earlier, where definitely as an IP, the universe itself, I myself as well have kind of felt a distinct lack of interesting worlds that are not, Dungeons and Dragon-esque. That you. Don't get me wrong. I love the aesthetic of like a knight fighting, and I think that it's nice that in the world that I'm writing, that there is space for that, right? There is space for some fantasy and everything, but it is explained in a slightly different way, so it allows for a really different aesthetic. And I've really crave like more mature takes on sci-fi, not just like lasers, pew pew, spaceships and stuff like that. Like, there's so much rich conceptual content and so much philosophy and so much metaphysics that's explained and explored in the genre, and I think there's such a distinct lack of people going there. When you see people do sci-fi in video games, a lot of times it's very much like what you'd expect, like almost kind of like spacesuity designs, laser guns or laser swords that kind of glow, and that's pretty much aliens on like 8 legs, and that's the kind of and tech panels, of course, like metal tech panels everywhere, and it's a missed opportunity, and I definitely saw that as a kind of gap for myself, and I said, I would love to see a world like this actually exist. I think there's definitely a big people would really enjoy something that tackles some of these concepts and everything, but in a way that's visually pleasing and touches on some beats that we love, but then does things in a completely different way in other aspects. So that's, I think it'll take some time to build into a kind of core and an idea that a lot of people can digest. But I think those who know how unique and interesting this first take was to begin with, and I think we're just going to keep crystallizing that as we go forward, through whichever medium it is.
You introduce the Vermilion dimension and the Vermilion entities and leave it there, like just touch it for a bit, just like with entropy. So there's definitely a lot of hints pointing at you don't know what the larger scope is, like it's telling the player, like, you don't know what the larger scope is here, and you don't need to know, because we have a beginning and an end to this particular narrative, and people usually can't make the distinction between story-driven narratives and world state-driven narratives, because there are the stories that are about the characters and they're about the hero's journey, and there are those narratives that focus on the state of the world you inhabit and what the world is about and how larger than life the events can be, so you can't even begin to understand what's happening here. And that's hinted by some characters, particularly two, if I remember correctly. Like, things are set in motion we can't understand the repercussions of, and by the end you hear everything is changing, everything will keep changing, we have no control over what's happening now. It's extremely interesting, and I know that you designed all the armors, I know you designed all the swords, all the clubs, all the bonks, all the stuff in the game was made by your pen. So I have all the trust in the world that you will be able to expand upon this and make it interesting. Now, when it comes to the equipment that we use throughout the game, you have a lot of armor sets. Some of these armor sets are statistically kind of samey, some are a bit different. Did you want to just have 3 archetypes of armor, let's say, and then allow for player expression to just mix and match and create their own feel of the character, their own look? Or did you, let's put it bluntly, you created a lot of assets, beautiful looking assets, but you didn't want to go into the process of, I'm gonna give +5 sharp defense here, +5 blunt here? What was your approach? Allow for more player expression, or just running out of steam and saying, well, I designed all this, it's good to have it there. Do we want to tinker with every single piece of gear here?
No, yeah, so the idea was definitely the former, where you have, I don't like equipment bloat and things like that in RPGs and worlds. So, and I like the kind of viability of, if this is something that you want to have, just use that. If I don't like being ushered into this is your end game gear, this is what every end game character is going to look like one of these 3 sets or something like that. So that kind of making sure that everything is viable. So everything's on a kind of spectrum of, as you said, like light, medium, heavy. Largely anything in between that is totally viable, and I generally prefer that. I think that's the kind of direction we're going to go towards in the future as well. But it just allows players to kind of have their say in what they look like, and not make anything feel, yes, you don't have the wow, I found the rarest possible this thing, whatever. But it also makes sure that everything that you pick up is viable in some way. And I like that kind of steady reward cycle that doesn't feel almost like predatory, where you're getting people to like get this one huge dopamine surge because they've killed the same enemy like 10,000 times, and you're like, oh my god, I finally got this thing. And it's like, I just kind of don't find that fair towards the people's time investment and everything. If you're playing, you should feel a consistent kind of risk-reward kind of approach to that, and having agency over what you look like, but also not losing, like not going down the path of what you're wearing doesn't matter because you can transmogrify or like change the appearance of everything that you're wearing. It's nice to see what you expect from a certain build. Are they light, medium, heavy? Those kinds of things as well, like not losing the identity of what the armor set itself is.
This thing that you mentioned about the dopamine surge, like there is the brain that works closer to seeking the dopamine, there's the brain that works closer to seeking the serotonin, and Bleak Faith is a very serene experience at its core. It's the slow burn, about the incremental boost to how you perform, to how you fight. That's what I think makes it such a unique journey, because yes, you'll find the item, the item might look interesting, have a unique ability or moveset, but overall there's such scope to the areas you're traversing and nitpicking to find the stuff, that you very rarely find something that you're like, oh, I found this and this is the game changer. You find a piece of armor, it's upgraded to Mark III, you are at a Mark 4 point in your adventure, and when you try to compare it, it's like, well, this is not gonna change my life now unless I upgrade it, I tool it, and all that stuff. So you, I think, struck a very good like middle ground between finding the exciting thing and improving the beloved thing, like the constant companion, like that one claymore you find in the beginning, very viable by the end of the game, you know?
Yeah.
And I also liked what you did, like this is gonna be controversial, but I liked what you did with the respecting of the perks, because the stats you can redistribute at any point. You can get a basilisk hack, very easy to craft item, but only once per playthrough can you reassign your perks. So you're like, make an investment to this character because you'll be hanging around with them for 15 hours. You know, that was a very, very good middle ground compromise. I wanna ask one last thing when it comes to the technical part of the gameplay, because we started very romantic with the artistic direction and the uncompromising vision, and now we're getting into the gamey stuff. But we have to mention those as well. I think there are people who are interested. You went from a totally gear-reliant growth mechanic to an XP-reliant growth mechanic, where of course the gear ties into, but it is not as drastic as it was, because I remember back in the day when I realized that not just getting constitution buffs through my armored crystals would I get the best benefits of health, but if I hit that sweet spot, then I had to go for flats and get just numerical values on top of everything else. Do you think that the XP system takes a bit out of the identity of the game that we initially have, but it was necessary to make people more easy to understand? Or by the end of the day you were thinking like, well, you're gonna beat the boss and that huge chunk of experience is in itself the reward that you get for succeeding? Which way worked most profoundly for you?
Yeah, I think, and that's definitely a good question, because all of this exists on a kind of spectrum. You know, it's a million little decisions, design decisions, and how they in the end are perceived by a player. Are they coherent at all or not? And I think a part of, like you said, there's definitely a benefit to having this idea of, like, I have to kind of think about what the sweet spots are for what I'm trying to go for. I think it adds a layer, that approach adds a layer of the get good, but get good in like building your character. You know, it's not just in the gameplay itself, it's about how you think about where you're going to go with each stats, what you're going to invest in, what your resource, your time investment is going to go into to further improve your character. And I think because there were some kind of, I think some decisions came slightly at odds with others based on player feedback. So those were that was kind of the moment where I think it clicked for slightly too few people, that it was then undermining like the rest of the experience as well. You know, like the crux of this was the atmosphere, was the world, was a lot of these things, and then there is another sweet spot on a design scale where we do that more intuitively. And I think somewhere initially the way that we did it, it just wasn't clicking well enough, and it was taking away from pretty much everything else as well, right? So then it was a kind of simpler, let's go back and bring it a little bit to the basics, and something that gives, again, a more steady feel, where if you come, a lot of times, for example, people would come in and play for 45 minutes and achieve nothing. There was no drop, there was nothing worthwhile, and it feels a little bit unfair to not have a balanced play where, like, if someone comes in and they only have 30 minutes to play the game, it's nice to know that you have pushed the needle somewhat, right? And that's the kind of thing that experience gain and levels kind of ensures, that it doesn't matter if you come in for 15 minutes, and sometimes you don't even have to find some loot. The fact that you pass through a bunch of enemies and you use that for some advantage, you've made yourself the advantage by just interacting with the experience itself. So that was it was a kind of decision to not be unfair towards some people and so brutal in where people's time investment goes. And so I don't think it lost in its identity per se, as much as it kind of tailored to a wider audience. And I find those kinds of things are completely okay. I think because they're methods. I have this like kind of personal approach where when you're designing mechanics and things, it's very important to listen to players and to player feedback. When you're designing the world, it's not. You know, you don't want to.
That is wise.
Like, let's let them tell us what the, yes, this sounds like a good idea for lore, or they didn't like the story, or they didn't like how this looks, and it's like, that's fine. And we're not going to change that just because some person here didn't like it. But when it comes to interaction, it's definitely a different ballgame. So as you said, there's the romantic aspect of things, which is purely subjective, and then there's this part where there is a certain maturing with your audience, striking that sweet spot as well, and finding ways where the design itself can accommodate for that. And we spoke a little bit about like these ideas of even going in the future where we kind of plan on going with these things, and that's one of the ones where it's like, could we still fit in those different styles of mindsets into one same game, right? And I think that's a very important goal for us from a design perspective, is like, can we solve that design problem by giving players enough tools to approach it based on what their internal risk-reward system is like, what their daily schedule looks like and everything, and still ensuring that everyone is challenged fairly and gets a chance to experience the world. So that's the kind of long run of what the lessons were from changing things around, and understanding that neither way is correct. And in an ideal world, you find a way to balance them even better, to fit them all into like a Build-A-Bear, but build your own RPG experience kind of example.
The current state is fine though, like the gear helps, is customizable, the stats also have to be handled when it comes to the XP gains. I think for how it started and how it ended up being, it was an organic process of, let's say, streamlining the experience. Because I remember, man, I put so many crystals for Constitution in back in the day, and our guy with that huge Dodachi, he cut me down 1,000,000 times in the first version of the game. And I'm like, what the hell am I doing wrong here? Something is wrong here. So Forsaken, this has been our interview with Mista, the lead designer of Bleak Faith Forsaken, coming out August 6th on the PlayStation 5. I had a chance to go through that build. It is in a very good state. I am pretty sure it will keep improving like the rest of the game did for so long. I have to make a personal plea to all of you gamers out there who watch this for the better part of 2 hours. Developing games on a scale of the indie market right now is a huge challenge that not many people realize. It's handling a lot of stuff, juggling a lot of responsibilities, and the workload can be insane. Don't be so quick to dismiss the work of small studios, because for every one of these releases that sees the light of day and sometimes improves, sometimes the devs get disheartened and say like, screw this, there's no way we're pulling this out of the grave. There was a lot of work and passion that went into the project, no matter how it ended. A game that didn't live up to its potential upon release doesn't necessarily mean it was a scam or someone tried to trick you. Sometimes it is a lot of blood, sweat and tears to get something out of the door, especially when you don't have insane backing that many of the huge studios that we keep paying money to enjoy. And that has been the state of the industry since forever. Indie devs have a lot to offer us, and I say support them, give a vote of confidence, as these guys right here, they work their asses off. And when you get your hands on Bleak Faith on the consoles, and on Steam of course, where you can still get it at any given moment, you'll find a product that is very, very well put together at this point. And Mista, personally, the vote of confidence that you asked for a year and a half ago, 100% delivered, man. Like, you put the work in, it is a transformed experience at this point, and I'm eternally grateful for having the chance to experience it. I love the game. Just keep doing what you're doing, and I'm sure we're gonna see a lot of great stuff in the future from you.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for the kind words, and as you said, just gonna keep plowing ahead and doing more of what we love doing.
Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for your time. I wish you all the success in the world with the console release. People, subscribe, like, hit the notification bell for more content like this. We'll be doing a lot of cool stuff with Bleak Faith Forsaken in the upcoming weeks. Until next time, be well, stay frosty, and always strive for perfection. Cheers.